Welcome, everybody, to our next session in the performance track, a track that I've had the privilege of chairing and helping to organize, along with my colleagues, Jessica Newhall and others. I thought that we had a fabulous beginning to this track with the McKinsey session and Chris Vane, who I thought delivered some wonderful examples of innovation, including his talk about the open government movement, the Blue Button VA health care record delivery system, which is a terrific program that we know and have written about, and the spread of that program to the green button in energy and the gold button in financial, the rainbow button in education. His interesting revelation, is that too strong a word, that the White House is about to unveil a system for developing a network of innovators in the civil service, which is, I think, a very important thing to do, and recalls actually the beginning of this conference when in 1996, Al Gore, Vice President Gore, wanted to bring together innovators who were involved in the reinventing government movement of that era. Pat McGinnis, sitting in the second row, was there at the beginning, and it's nice to see now that this idea of bringing innovators together to discuss and learn from one another is going virtual, as it should be in today's age. I want to welcome, there's no one better to teach about innovation, actually, than our guest today, Bruce Chu, who is a Harvard Business School professor who has studied and taught innovation for many years. He is now with the Monitor Group, which helps organizations in the public sector and the private sector develop new, better ways of doing business. We've asked him to talk about how you get innovation done in a bureaucracy. We've already heard a little bit about that from other speakers. But Professor Chu has a highly developed system of study and learning that has brought him to us as a person who can speak about, again, innovation in a bureaucracy. I want to acknowledge and thank Pat McGinnis for being here with us today, for helping to organize this conference over many years. She has recently signed on with the Monitor Group to advise them, to consult with them on how better to serve you all, to serve people who are in the public sector, and there's no one better than Pat and together with Bruce and his colleagues to do that. Bruce, I don't think I'm going to introduce you any further because we're really here to hear from you, and thanks for being here.
That sounds good to me. Thank you. And I too am going to start off talking about the innovation imperative, but I'm not going to go through the roots of the imperative. I think Eric did a terrific job laying out why it's an imperative at this point in time. And I believe it truly is an imperative. I actually came down from Portland Airport in Maine here, and there's the saying in Maine you've probably heard is, you can't get there from here. And to where government needs to go, you can't get there from here. There's going to be a need to innovate in order to get there. In order to get to what we need to do in terms of recognizing the greater demand for services that's coming, in order to be able to respond to the challenges that we face in terms of funding, et cetera, the things we laid out earlier. I actually had a moment of deja vu this morning when I first went through these slides. We put them up and the big words innovation imperative came up. And it occurred to me that the first time I think I saw that phrase was 25 years ago. Well, the first thing is that depressed me because it was much longer ago than I would have thought. I was a young assistant professor with a full head of hair at Harvard at the time. And we were doing a conference there. And I had a little bit of a flashback to that conference. And at that conference, it resulted in a book that was called The Productivity Technology Dilemma, which I don't recommend you all go out and buy. You probably can't even find the thing today. But what's interesting to remember is at that point in time, we brought together a group of from the private sector, of business leaders from the private sector who were running companies. And what drove that particular conference was the U.S. slowdown in productivity, the challenge Japan was presenting. And we were looking at that moment in time, the loss of manufacturing jobs. We were looking at the world at that moment in time and saying, gee, managers in the private sector are facing an innovation imperative. That they, at that moment in time, business as usual wouldn't work for them. And there's been a lot of change since then. There's been, the internet came along, cell phones come, there's been a number of major innovations that have helped resulting in a dramatic growth for the private sector since that time. But it's also, that particular conference came at a point in time, and it wasn't that conference, but that moment in time led to a lot of changes in curriculum at business schools around the country. I was involved with Kim Clark, who later became the dean, of writing a proposal to the dean at that time, John MacArthur, in which we said, you know, there ought to be a required course that dealt with innovation. And the Harvard Business School had been teaching managers for 75 years and had never required them to talk about innovation. And that was actually common at business schools. Now, today at business schools, there are courses on entrepreneurship, there's courses on product development, there's courses on product design, there are design tools taught, there are design projects, there's a great deal done in innovation now. And that same imperative is coming around to your world now. That same imperative, and I fully expect there will be the same dramatic response to that imperative, that there will be a move so that innovation becomes a normal part of leadership's role, as it has become now in training leaders for the private sector. That innovation will become a normal part of your world. I talked with a number of people about what I should focus on in this talk. And I'll tell you, the most popular proposed topic was sort of innovators versus bureaucrats. It was the champions of innovation versus the defenders of the status quo. And that would have been a great talk because it's great. All the people in the room, we could all agree we're the champions of innovation, and all the people back at the agency are the defenders of the status quo. We could talk about how awful they are. We could list our top 10 problems with them. We could have a great old time. I think that's probably the wrong way to frame the problem. I think actually framing it that way is part of the problem. Recently, I was at an organization with a bunch of people. The vast majority of the people in this organization were technocrats. They had no P&L responsibility whatsoever. They had no revenue. They had no. They just had budgets they worked with. They had no contact with customers in most cases. They had no clear performance measures for their group. They were absolutely compulsive about documenting everything. No change could be made unless it was officially sanctioned ahead of time and then done in a very prescribed manner. It sounds like I'm describing the worst aspects of some bureaucratic agencies. I'm actually describing a visit I made to the R&D group of a pharmaceutical firm. That, in fact, a laboratory has a lot of really strict rules and a bunch of people who are really technocrats. And it's really hard to measure performance because whatever they do actually isn't going to show up for several years. All they got is a budget. And most of them don't have much in the way of promotion opportunities. It's just going to be how long did you work here, and eventually you move up. But this particular company, it's got all those, quote, bad attributes, and it's known for its innovative development of new products. So it isn't bureaucracy versus the new. I think that's the wrong way to frame it. And part of that, I think, comes from the way we talk about innovation. We tend to talk about innovation as anything that's new. I've got a new way to do this. That's an innovation. I bought a new piece of technology. That's an innovation. And in fact, that's not really what makes an innovation. If you focus on new, then new versus status quo becomes the natural debate. When I think about innovation in your world, I think more about creating new public benefit. And if you shift the emphasis from just focusing on new to focusing on public benefit, then in your world, your mission incorporates innovation. Increasing public benefit is part of your mission. And I think if we frame it that way, we get out of this conflict of us versus new versus old, status quo versus change, and we start focusing on public benefit. And we find there are three different paths to public benefit, three different areas of focus for innovation, if you will. And the three we find over and over again in the private sector and in the public sector are three different domains that innovation takes place in. And all of these are paths to creating greater public benefit. One of them is configuration. This changes the assets and activities you have that are delivering the services. So if I put in a new computer system, I am changing the configuration to some extent. So you know, we're going to hand out copies of all the slides as you leave. We'll have folks handing out by the door pages of all. So you don't need to worry about taking notes as we go along. All the key pieces you'll be able to walk out the door with. So you don't need to worry about taking notes. Configuration is one domain, and that's largely often invisible to the people you serve. New offerings is a different area. That's a new service. That's a new product. That's a new report that we do. It's something new that we do. And finally, there's innovation in the experience your customer or client has. It might be we really haven't changed the way we run the process. We really haven't changed what we deliver, but we've changed the way the customer experiences it. If you think about those three domains, and setting aside for the moment, not that they aren't important, but setting aside for the moment, taking your existing forms and documents and products and putting them online. Let's take that one off for a minute, because the online has been a big part of the experience change. And that's been a massive undertaking by government. I don't mean to belittle, but I want to take that one offline for a minute. Setting that aside, think for a minute about your agency. Which of these three domains has been the principal focus of your organization's innovation? You'll have a mix some, I suppose. But think for a minute, which of these has been the principal focus? Has it been the process by which we deliver stuff, the configuration? Has it been we've added new offers and services? Has it been we've changed the way we engage with customers and the experience they have? I'm going to ask for a show of hands. How many for configuration? And Jessica, can you help me count? I'm going to need those hands up high again. I want to just get a quick count. 20. How many for new offering or service? Real high? 15. And how many for customers' experience? Okay, it's a good even distribution, basically, with a little less on offerings. If you were a random cross-section of business leaders, what do you think the hands would show? What was that? Somebody said here? Offerings, yes, offerings. Overwhelmingly, when you talk to business leaders, when you say innovation to business leaders, they think new product. They think the new and improved XV17. It's now with stannous fluoride or whatever. They're thinking about that new product. And so you get this huge spike there. Our experience in government is you do see just what we saw in this room in surveys we've done. We see a richer distribution than we typically see in business, and we actually see less emphasis on the offerings and services. That tends to be the lesser of the three, partly because your offerings are often, I think, tied up with your mission. And so certain sets of your offerings are actually defined by the mission that you have. Now, it's important in having identified those three, and there are different challenges that come with them. Organizations here tend to have, there are a bunch of, the re-engineering toolkit shows up big here. Organizations that are focused here, really understanding your customer is really critical. But in fact, what we find is the innovations that have the most impact tend to hit more than one of those at a time. The ones that are really breakthrough in the private sector, the ones that are really profitable, are the ones that involve changes in configuration, changes in experience, and changes in offerings as well. That's not to say others aren't valuable, but when you can mix them together, when you can say, I can create a new experience, and it's so new I've got to make changes in the configuration, I can get a bigger step change. And often trying to get that big step change triggers the need for it to be multidimensional. And when we think about examples we see in government, we see the same sort of thing. Lots that, in fact, hit more than one piece of the puzzle at a time. And I'm obviously not going to walk through all of these in detail. You do have, I am going to hand out this picture as you leave, so you can actually look any of these up. Many of them are on Wikipedia, but if you put in the little names we have, you'll be able to find them. Let me just identify them real quick, because I think they give a nice illustration of the range, and we've chosen them from a variety of different parts of the government. They're all the federal government. Many of these are Kennedy School Award winners. A couple of these we stole out of Government Executive, a great source of innovations. Let me just point some out. The top one up there The impact-based warnings by the National Weather Service, they're under trial in 2 states now, and if you live in those states, you're about to hear very different tornado warnings. And what they really are doing is they've changed the offering, they've changed the way they were going to report a tornado. It's not a new technology, it's a new way to talk about a warning. And what they've found is in recent years, when they announce there is a dangerous tornado in the neighborhood, the standard reaction is increasingly, Mabel, get the camera! And people run outside to go take pictures of the tornado. Now, the National Weather Service mission isn't actually to predict the weather. The National Weather Service mission is about public safety. And so the fact that when they give a warning, people go jump in their cars and drive towards the tornadoes does not work well from their mission's point of view. And so interestingly, they've actually teamed up with sociologists and psychologists to try to talk about, this isn't a weather forecasting problem, this is a people problem. So we've reached outside our normal disciplines, outside the people we usually associate with our mission, to try to figure out what do we do. And they're actually looking at phrases, this is my favorite, was massive destruction. Neighborhoods may be unrecognizable to survivors. Now that does not make me want to rush out and take pictures. And so they're actually talking, there actually is not survivable is the highest level. That if you are in the open, this tornado is not survivable. And these are made possible by higher standards. But obviously what they're looking for is to get Bob and Mabel not to rush out and start taking pictures. So that's the warnings. The visual service delivery by the Social Security Administration, a great example. It began initially in the Denver Center, which is some of the most isolated people. There are some who are 280 miles from the nearest Social Security office. And people aren't availing themselves of some of the benefits they should be receiving. And it's tough. I wonder if I deserve any benefits. I think I'll drive 560 miles round trip to find out. People don't do that. And so what they've created are actually some centers where you go in and it's a visual connection. It's a virtual office. You go in and you're able to see live video and talk to people. And what they found is the people in these rural areas who aren't users, they're not comfortable trying to do this by mail. They're not comfortable trying to do this on the internet. They're not comfortable driving 500 miles to see if it's worthwhile. And particularly a lot of these folks are on Indian reservations in this particular region. And they've set these up, and they've been enormously successful, so much so that what began as something to serve rural people is now being adopted in the Denver area, is now being adopted in every region. It's being adopted for U.S. citizens overseas. Other people have come to visit. It's looking to expand its role with other government services because it could be a virtual office for a variety of things. So another great example, growing from here a situation where, again, the back room isn't any different, and it's really not an innovation. We've set up some cameras in an office space and rented some space, but we've got a very different experience and a new offer for the customers. Regulations.gov you're probably familiar with. The EPA was one of the leading organizations involved with that, Department of Labor as well. That's an environment where historically if the EPA was thinking about regulations, you could go to the hearings and try to talk with them. You could correspond with them, but you'd have to know they were having hearings about something. And often people were hiring lawyers just to try to figure out how to get through the system. This is actually a searchable database that lets you say, I really care about Maine lobsters. Are there any regulations affecting Maine lobsters that are being considered? And I can actually go in and type Maine lobsters. And up will come any regulations being considered by the various participants that have to deal with those, and they link me then to the ability to fill out forms to comment. So it is a different experience for me because I can find them through a very different path, but I'm actually just electronically filling out the same form I would have filled out electronically in the old days, but now I can find it through a very different path. Over here to do the other single one, the DOD's energy installation test bed. The DOD has 300,000 buildings, 2.2 billion square feet, and is interested in reducing energy costs. It's also interested in being able to have energy off the grid and some other energy-related security issues. This is a program where it's inviting people to install their energy-saving stuff, and they will assess how well does this thing work in a retrofit situation. They hopefully becoming a lead user for much of the government and the private sector as well as they become a test bed for these. And you can work your way through the others. The Partnership for Patients you may know about, the HHS and some other groups are involved with that, pushing for a 40% reduction in things like infections acquired in the hospital and a 20% reduction in people who go home and have to come back. The Coast Guard's maritime tracking was an award winner. It's one of the older ones up here, but post 9/11, there are an awful lot of ships wandering around with nobody keeping track of them. Initially, it was said, what's it going to take to keep track of that? And people said, it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. It'll take years, and it'll all be proprietary classified technology. They actually built an unclassified system built off of systems that were being used at the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Panama Canal in a very short period of time for very low money. The Promised Neighborhood Program are wraparound services for children to help improve their education and their development. The VA REACH program is centered around homeless veterans and it's open sourcing some innovation as well, looking for apps that people can build on the platform to help people find it. USPS is looking at, it's closing some sites and opening mini post offices in some local grocery stores. Transformation of human resources within the Defense Department's logistics agency. And the IRS ran into the problem that was described. I don't want to take credit for this line. It came out of actually the government executive article, and it was a wonderful anecdote. They would occasionally, the IRS would talk to someone and say, we're surprised we didn't hear from you. We sent you a notice that we were seizing your assets. And I said, you didn't send me that. I said, yeah, no, we did, right there. It says, note to levy. Levy meaning that we're seizing your assets or garnishing your wages. I said, oh, I thought you were looking for something. It was a note to some guy named Levy. So he doesn't live here, so I threw it away. So we've got some problems in that world. And that's a world where the clarity of speech matters. We actually had to do some things, really rethink how we communicated with our customers, because from a delivery point of view, that was quite a reasonable memo. From the recipient's point of view, it was horribly problematic. So this gives you just a range of the kind of innovations that are going on. And I'd say you can look up more about these. I put them up here more just to show a couple of things. One, very rich set across the different domains of configuration, configuration experience, and offering. Two, many of them are multidimensional with regard to those. And three, they exhibit a lot of the common characteristics. And Eric referred to some of these earlier. They tend to be, many of them involve multiple agencies. A number of them involve open sourcing. Many of them involved some test and progression as it went along. We began with it small, built up from there. That's a repeated pattern also here. We started small, we built up from there, we tested, we prototyped, we learned. That's also a common aspect of them. The other common aspect they have is they all have a clear opportunity that they're pursuing. They've all had a clear idea about what is it I'm trying to deliver against. None of these are what we see too often in organizations in the private sector or the public sector, which is there's a new piece of technology, how do I apply it? Because there's a vendor who came by my office and told me it would be a great idea if I applied this new piece of technology. And so we need to think about, well, what is not the new technology that could enable innovation, but what's the opportunity to innovate? Now, normally, at this point in the talk, I segue into, let me tell you our process for innovation. And I could do a monitor pitch for the monitor approach to innovation. Every company who sells anything to the government has their approach. Anybody who's done innovation has an approach, and it is a 6-stage approach that's been trademarked, or there's a 5-stage approach that has a great graphic, or there's some process we would do. I'm not going to do that. Most of the approaches are different labels for a lot of the same things. The important attributes of most approaches are things like multiple groups involved, open sourcing, test and learn. Those are the kind of things that are important here. I do, though, want to talk for the rest of the time that I have, not about what is a process you should follow, but what are some of the critical determinants of success? Not what are some of the barriers you need to overcome, because I don't want to just say if you removed all the barriers, you'd be fine. I want to turn it into the positive. What do you need to focus on to have this work? And I'm going to real quickly touch on something we already talked about briefly in the last session when we talked about the blue button. You know what the blue button is. You get it downloaded. It is a monstrous success. It has grown from the VA and the CMS as well. It began initially in January of 2010. Some discussions initiated the impetus for it with I've got a mental block against remembering it's the Markle Foundation. I once referred to them as the Barclay Foundation, and now I've got both names stuck in my head forever, but it's the Markle Foundation. And they're proponents of, in order to have viable democracy, in order to have true democracy, government needs to communicate, there needs to be transparency, and people need to be engaged. And so that's been their focus. They held a workshop that some key people attended, and that grew into the Blue Button. The Blue Button was an initiative, again, it began very simply. It was a lot of shared learning back and forth. The VA was bringing medical records on. CMS was bringing Medicare claims on, so a little different in that respect. But a lot of shared learning went back and forth. And it's been a tremendous success. It's being adopted by the private sector and so on and so forth. What I want to do is to ask a slightly different question about it. Not, isn't it a great innovation? It is. And it exhibits all those good things. There are multiple agencies involved. They trial and tested it. They right now have apps that are being built on it that are open source. So they've done all those good things. But I want to ask a slightly different question. This was a well-recognized problem. Why didn't the private sector solve this themselves? Because the private sector is jumping all over this solution. Why didn't the private sector solve it themselves? Now, one argument is, well, there were regulatory things and there was this, but I actually would look a little differently at it because I'm familiar with two different companies who attempted to have initiatives in the can't we make medical records available universally. And those two different organizations were in the private sector, and they said, they were talking to doctors now. They said, doctors would like to have all of your records available at the touch of a button. How do we solve that? And what's interesting is there are two big differences in the way they attacked the problem. One is the private sector folks went after the doctors. The public sector did something different. They said, not how do I put a solution in the doctor's hand. They said, how do I get the citizen involved? How do I get the vet so that he can get the records and take them around? And that's a really important difference, and they're solving a different problem. The doctor's complaint is, this isn't complete. I'd prefer for it to be complete. The citizen's complaint, because I actually have been through this one, is I had to physically go to that office and pay them to make copies, and then I had to physically take them to this office so that they would have them on file, because it was the only way to get it done to be sure they'd be there for my appointment. Because the last time I did it, he said, oh, I don't have those records yet. You'll have to come back in 2 weeks. And then when I filed the insurance claim, they said, didn't you have this appointment 2 weeks ago? So they really were addressing what was an enormous problem in the experience of veterans trying to cope with this world, which is a very different problem than the doctors were trying to solve. And with that came a different definition of what a success was. The private sector people wanted to have the documents all come up formatted for the doctor the way all of his records were. So I have a record system. Each hospital has its own, and they have a particular format, a particular style, a particular set of software that supports them and allows me to manipulate them. And I wanted all the records to come up fitting within my system. That's the big, powerful solution. And we talked about it in the last session, when he talked about you don't necessarily go for the whole be-all and end-all solution right from the start. They were trying to get the be-all and end-all solution right from the start. And they were focused on what is the ultimate solution for this thing. The public sector folks over at the VA were saying, how do I make progress against this problem? Different question from how do I get the ultimate solution? And in fact, a critical step in their process came very early on when they said, what is the standard we're going to download? What are we going to download through this? Because there are a whole bunch of different format choices. There are a whole bunch of different software packages that could be used. And the group decided we're going to download it in ASCII. It's the simplest, stupidest, most universal thing there is. Now, you can't do much with it. You basically get this download that prints out your medical records. But we'll take it. Right now, the guy hasn't got his medical records. We could give him his medical records in a very simplistic form. Let's do that. And so that became the focus. And so they went not for an elegant solution for doctors. They went for a simple solution for citizens. And that was really at the heart of why they were successful when the private sector was not. And this brings me to something that I want to underscore today, and that's the importance of really establishing what is the opportunity space you're going after. In the private sector, they tend to go after big solutions, and there is a model behind their processes. You wouldn't see it when you see the steps, but if you work with them, there's a mindset that sounds something like this. My job in running R&D is to place the best bets. And they use the language of horse racing all the time, is we're placing bets. And the purpose of this process is to find the winners. And the expectation of a lot of these organizations is I will have 7 losers for every winner I get. And that's okay in the private sector. The idea that I am placing bets, but some of them will pay off big, works for private sector managers. In the public sector, the idea that each year my plan is to have 7 out of 8 of the things I attempt fail is not the way to get a lot of positive attention. It's not a way to get positive attention from your boss. It's certainly not the way to get positive attention from the press. And part of the problem is you don't get the massive cash payoff from a success that then allows you to be forgiven for all the sins of the other 7. And so the mental model behind a lot of what goes on when business looks at innovation is, the elegant phrase is, we'll let 1,000 flowers bloom. The ugly phrase is we'll throw it at the wall and see what sticks. But the idea is, I've got a bunch of possible solutions. We'll keep killing them off till we find the winners. We're looking at a different mindset. We're looking at a different mindset for the blue button. We're looking here at a different question. I'm not looking for the winning solution. I'm trying to get a well-defined opportunity space. I'm trying to say, what is the target I'm going after? And my purpose in innovation, up here at the top you can see, I want to explore the attractive opportunity space. I'm not trying to pick a winner. I'm trying to explore the attractive opportunity space. The reason that's so important in government is if I can get consensus around this as an important space of opportunity, people will understand I'm exploring it. And so when I say I'm launching an initiative, I don't say I've got an idea for a virtual office that the SSA could have. I say I've got constituencies that aren't availing themselves of Social Security services. I'm not fulfilling my mission to them. It would be desirable for us to do that. And in terms of the technology, it's feasible. We could set up, the cost is low enough now, we could set up these little virtual spaces at relatively low-cost offices, and they'd run pretty cheaply within my existing organization. What's viable here is a question of, if I set it up, can I make a one-time success, or can this become a sustainable thing? Is this something that organizationally and in terms of regulation I can get going on an ongoing basis? And in terms of funding as well. If the cost is way out of proportion to the benefit, I've got a problem. But if I can establish going in that, as long as I stick to an ASCII output, this thing is feasible. And it would be really desirable for the vets to have their records readily available. And this fits our mission, this fits our organization quite nicely. We could make this work. That clear identification of the opportunity space is critical to building the success. And it's critical. It allows you to get other constituencies involved. It allows you to frame what you're doing in a very different way. It lets, to use, the example we talked about earlier, when we talked about San Francisco with Wi-Fi, we missed on the first 2 solutions, but we kept at it against the opportunity space. And so this notion of focusing on the opportunity space is a critical one. It was critical for the blue button. It's critical actually for most of the ones I was pointing to. In fact, a couple of these, arguably the Partnership for Patients, which is a characterization of we as a country are going to reduce avoidable problems like catching a disease while in the hospital by 40%, and we're going to reduce returns to the hospital by 20%. You can argue that's actually the HHS taking the role of defining an opportunity space for others to innovate in. Similarly, the DoD is actually building a test bed for an opportunity space. It doesn't know what the solution is going to be. Its role is to manage the space in which the solution is going to be found. So this is one of the things I really want you to take away from today. I don't want you to think about, well, it's a 6-step process, and the first step is ideation, and then there's testing and learning, and then there's prototyping. No, I want you to think about you need to invest in being clear about the opportunity space. You need to be articulate about the opportunity space. You need to define it in terms of how it relates to your mission. You need to be clear that it is desirable, it is feasible, and it is viable. Those seem trivial. You'd be surprised if you go back to your office right now and have everything on your table of projects that are being run right now. You'll find some that are, well, we could do it. It's kind of low on the desirability scale. We've got some that are unclear of whether it's feasible. We've got some that we could do and they'd be sexy as hell, but they aren't actually viable in the long run. And so those simple questions are really critical ones to answer, and to answer up front in the course of the project. So that's one of the key things I want you to take away. Now, the other question that was addressed earlier today was we talked some about where ideas come from in organizations. And we talked about an expanded White House effort to build a community of civil servants who want to be involved with innovation, who are innovators, because we believe a lot of the good ideas come from them. One of the reasons that they are such a great source of ideas is because they have some of the closest knowledge in what is really a common blind spot in government. There is a blind spot about customers in government in many, many agencies. Blind spot about who are our customers and how do they use our service. Now, everyone in this room is currently thinking, I don't have a blind spot there. Let me assure you, many people in this room, your organization has a blind spot there. This came up, I've used the phrase blind spot since I was a kid. I actually have a blind spot now. The reason I need this cane is I can't see my hand right now. The weird thing is, there's not a big black dot there. It seems like I can see, but I can't. My brain keeps telling me, no, it's kind of, everything's fine, but I can't see it. That's what a real blind spot is. You don't know it when you've got it. You can't see it. And this is actually a big issue in government. About 9 years ago, we got involved with helping the intelligence community in the space of innovation. You can see why that happened about 9, 10 years ago. There were some events that caused the intelligence community to decide there is an innovation imperative in their community. And we've been involved with some organizational innovation there. We've been involved with some innovative tools there. And one of the things that fascinated me was I would go talk with analysts, and I would say, who is your customer? And do you know what the number one answer I got was? Any guesses? No, they had one in mind. See, that would admit they had a blind spot. No, the President of the United States. And that was inspiring. That was ultimately true. That was totally useless as a guide to doing anything. Because it was like, well, last time you talked to him, how do you like your work? You know, that's not going to happen. What did he think of the last report of yours that he read? Well, he's never actually seen a report by any report from anyone in my department. So who are our customers? And we laugh about that, but the citizens of the United States, veterans, these are our customers. And in fact, that is not a level of precision that is that much better than the President of the United States. How do they use our service? Again, I know how they use our service. They come in and they get it. You know, I send them a check. I regulate them. I give them an award. There are all kinds of things I do. I know how they use our service. This is really a different, more detailed question about not what do they do with the thing I send them, but what's the world in which they're using our service like. And so when I think about the social services example, who are our customers? Well, actually, they thought of a group of customers who weren't using any of their services. These isolated people, a lot of them on reservations, who were not availing themselves of the services they were due. That required a real understanding of the environment in which they were not using our services and the fact that there was a segment that was not using our services. And no matter how much you talked to the people who were using your services, you weren't going to find them. It required a different way to think about our customers. And this is really the source of a lot of identification of how do I think about an opportunity space, is to understand who are our customers and how do they use our service, and where is there an opportunity for us to do more with less, to provide more benefit for less resources, to provide the same benefit with fewer resources, and what have you. The good news is there's whole sets of tools that can help you do this. You don't need to go invent any of this. Now, they were invented for other purposes. Businesses don't have a blind spot about customers, and there's a reason for that. Someone is always trying to steal their customers. So they're very mindful of who their customers is, how they're using the service, because they often are trying to say, I got to be sure to keep this customer. And other times they're saying, I got to get rid of those customers. Now, you're not allowed to get rid of those customers. That would help your budget enormously, but you're not allowed to get rid of any customers. And many of your customers, nobody's trying to steal, nobody wants them. And so you've got the problem, you were created because nobody wanted to serve them. That was the problem in many cases. Or you were created because the people you're regulating didn't want your service, and you still have the situation of nobody's trying to steal the customers. In business, they've developed tools to deal with this. On the who are our customers side, there's a whole toolkit to help understand customers. And at the heart of one big area is the whole set of tools around segmentation. It's a very powerful set of tools around segmentation. This is actually taken from some work we did from a city housing authority that thought in terms of buildings and spaces that we manage. And we turned around and said, let's think about it in terms of people who are renting the buildings and spaces that you are managing. And that turns the whole thing on its head. These were tools that were developed by marketers to sell stuff. But they aren't necessarily marketing tools. They're tools that can help you understand who are my constituents, how do I divide them up, what are the reasonable groups, and how do I sort them out in a way that helps me understand how I can take action that's meaningful against these different groups. How can I take action in delivering my mission against these different groups? There's another toolkit for the other question. How do they use our service? There's a whole bunch of tools from design, product design, the field of design I'm talking about here. And design thinking has become a real hot topic around the world now. You can pick up a lot of good articles on it. But at the heart of this point of view is a different set of questions, not who are my customers, but rather how do I think about them? And there are three key sets of tools around how do they use them. One is around exploring the next larger context. One is around look, listen, and learn. One is around finding the edge. Let me hit them real quickly. Exploring the next larger context. You can't design the world's best chair by studying chairs. Chairs are in a room. The room is in a building. The building is in a neighborhood. And you don't come up with the idea of a beach lounge chair by looking at one of these conference room chairs and saying, what else could we do with this? You need to understand the larger context in which it's being used. That was actually an important thing in the intelligence community when we began to understand and began to say, actually, you're writing a report to answer a question, but it's getting used for lots of different purposes. You need to understand that when you write it. Because the fact that that person knew what you were talking about doesn't mean the next person who picks it up will know. And so it begins to shape that understanding the context becomes critical. And it becomes important in this world if we think about some of the examples I cited earlier. The blue button example, it's understanding the context helped us because we realized, actually, let's shift from the doctor to the citizen and think about what he's doing. He could just physically take this thing to the doctor's office. That solves a big problem. So by understanding not the technical problem, but the person in the context in which they're operating, we're able to make action. Find the edge is a really cool part of the design world. What you do is you look for extreme users. There's a great saying which says, the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And so you go and look and say, well, if I figure out how to serve the extremes, that may help me figure out what to do for an innovation that serves the larger community. When they looked at non-users on Indian reservations in Colorado, they were looking at one type of extreme user. In the Coast Guard maritime tracker system, they said, who's really dealing with a lot of traffic they got to keep track of? Well, the Panama Canal and the St. Lawrence Seaway. And so they went down there and they said, hey, Panama Canal, how are you keeping track of this stuff? Hey, St. Lawrence Seaway, how are you keeping track of this stuff? And those two pieces became the building blocks for what became the global system for tracking. So this idea about looking at the users at the extreme is a piece of it. And finally, look, listen, and learn. And what that says is you don't ask people, what do you want? Because often they aren't going to name an innovation because they don't think in terms of innovations. If you ask them what they typically want more for less or more faster. And there's not much you can do with that. What you want to be able to ask is to actually look and listen and learn. What is it that you're doing? We did some work with the Ford F-150, the most popular truck in the world. And one of the things we did was we went and rode around with guys in their trucks. It was a great job. It's like, what are you doing? Well, I'm going to go to Texas and ride around with some contractors all day. And that's what we did. And one of the things that showed up very quickly is a major part of a contractor's day consists of, oh, crap, we forgot the air compressor. And so one of the things that says, you know what we could do? If we had little RFID chips, little radio chips on each tool, the truck could tell you if you had everything you needed. You could tell it I'm doing these jobs, and it could tell me if I had all the tools. And Ford said, well, that's a weird idea. And then they went to the people who make things like chainsaws and said, we're thinking about doing this. And they said, well, we'll put a chip in. If you got something to read it, we'll put a chip in. They're cheap, and we'll do that immediately. And right now, you can go and get that in the Ford F-150. And you never would think what this truck needs is RFID chip sensing technology. Well, there's nothing for it to sense. You couldn't figure that out unless you rode around in the truck. A great example of this is a tremendous Center for Innovation that we've done a lot of work with at the Mayo Clinic. The status quo in healthcare is unacceptable, is the core message, and I think there's an analog to your world, a core message that led them to build this innovation center. It's a neat innovation center. It's done a lot of things. One of the things it's done is it's created the HALE Lab, which is the Healthy Aging and In-Home Living Laboratory, which is actually the Charter House, which is a senior center that seniors visit, and a senior living facility, if you've seen those, where there are residents in apartments and they're residents of their own standalone homes. And they've wired the whole place. It's a living laboratory. Now, it's not secret. Everybody knows that it's wired, and they've got your privacy in some parts of it. But what they're able to do is to experiment with things and really watch what happens in different parts. We're going to try changing from tables to no tables in a meeting room. What happens? They're able to do anything they want and experiment with variables to create this living laboratory that helps them do this look, listen, and learn by watching real people they're serving in real time and watching what happens. This has been a tremendously successful center. It's the largest medical center looking at innovation right now, innovation center in the world, I believe. They've done a lot of neat things. One of the things they've done in there as well is they have 3 key opportunity spaces they're going after. And the short phrase for it is here, there, and everywhere. There's one about outpatient clinic. How do we revolutionize that when they come in? Outpatient services come in. There's one about how do I build a healthy neighborhood community, which is there. And everywhere is how do I do distance medical service. And those are the 3 platforms they have. And this center, in addition to doing its own sort of break out of the box thinking, in addition to providing design services to help different parts of the organization, also runs a program for everyone at the Mayo Clinic to contribute ideas against those 3 platforms. And so when I think about organizational responses, we're seeing a lot of innovation centers spring up in government. I think that's great. They're a powerful tool for breaking out of the box people tend to be in. But there's a danger with them, which is that everybody goes, oh, great, they're doing the innovation thing, and we don't have to worry about it. It's a little bit like the Harvard Business School in the old days where it was, oh, good, engineers and product developers do the innovation thing, and us managers don't have to worry about it. In fact, innovation is an imperative for everybody. And so when you think about innovation, the labs are really good for this kind of transformational innovation, where we're really trying to develop new offerings and bringing on new assets and resources, where we're trying to really target new segments and new needs. That kind of transformational work, you really need a lab to do that, to get the kind of out-of-the-box thinking. But in fact, most innovation is taking place in this space. These are the sexy ones, but most of it's going on in here, and you need to think about how do I do that as well. And the Mayo Clinic Lab has done a good job of building broader engagement initiatives as well, which is not just can you make a suggestion program, because if you run one of those, what you tend to get is 2 things. One, the main suggestions people make are, here's the thing that annoys me most about my life currently. And the second one is you get swamped with things that you can't then respond to, because they've submitted them as solutions. And very few of the solutions are going to get implemented. So you've set them up to feel like, see, I knew they weren't going to follow through with this. What they've done here, which is much more effective, is they've said, we are looking for suggestions about these opportunity spaces. And we, as the organization's leadership, are going to continue to talk about those opportunity spaces. And your idea may have been combined with somebody else's idea to create something here, which gave us some innovation in this opportunity space. But again, it's about the space. It engages people in exploring the space, not in naming their answer. And that helps both with the attitude of the people involved, and it also helps with the efficacy of their suggestions, because few people are walking around with a complete answer in their mind. So the key point about this is really, when I think about an organizational response for innovation, you need to be thinking about addressing the innovation imperative which exists across those different levels. Sort of core innovations, which are right around what you do today, enhancing that. Adjacencies, which are spreading out what you do, and transformational innovations, which are really different kinds of breakthroughs. So I've covered a lot of ground. The key things I want you to take away, this notion that innovation is about public benefit, that it's about configuration, experience, and offering, and combining those is particularly powerful. The notion that when you attack it, you're not really looking for a solution initially. These are solutions depicted here, but they all begin life as an opportunity space, a well-defined opportunity space that is desirable, feasible, and viable for your organization. And that a good way to develop insight about that opportunity space is to try to answer those two questions about your customers in a more sophisticated way. Now, who exactly are they, and how exactly are they using our product or our service? And finally, when you craft the organizational response that tries to explore those opportunity spaces, to think both about the breakthrough and the regular. That's a lot of ground to cover. But I hope you've taken from it some useful lessons. I am excited about the innovation imperative, and I do believe it's an imperative. And I do believe that what was the dominant choice among people I talked with for my topic today, which was champions of innovation versus defenders of the status quo, innovators versus bureaucrats. My hope is that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, that will seem like a silly distinction. That it will be innovation is a part of how we create public value, how we create public benefit. In a world that's changing in terms of the population and in terms of the technologies, of course we innovate. That's how we fulfill our mission. And I hope that the idea that innovation is as natural to agency managers becomes as natural as it is today, that innovation is natural to business managers, an idea that was alien, remember, just 20 years ago. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't run too long. We're good? Okay. Thank you.